I believe we are live. So thank you again for being here, spending your time with us on this monthly meeting of the Community Advisory Board. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to South Face Institute out of Atlanta to help facilitate the meeting.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So let's go ahead and progress to the next slide and run through the agenda. So we'll kick off with our usual attendance and objectives. Then we're going to transition over to just a brief update on some CAB engagement options, walk through our stakeholder effort to date, then go through a live exercise with y'all on talking through the community survey and filling you in on some of the objectives we have with that survey, as well as walking through any feedback y'all may have on it. And then we'll wrap up. Welcome all CAB members. We're very glad to have you. And then, okay. I'm getting a note saying my audio is not the best, so I'm going to try holding my microphone, and if it
Megan,
doesn't improve,
I think it was because people were not muted. I think now that everybody's muted, you sound fine.
Oh, all right. Thanks, Melinda. All right. So let's go ahead and do roll call. I'm just going to run through the name of each of the organizations here. And when I call your organization, just chime in with your name and present. And if I hear nothing, I'll assume you're not. So we'll lead off with 100% Athens.
Michael Songster here.
Action Inc. Action Inc. All right, Athens Area Home Builders Association.
John Newland.
Athens Housing Authority. Athens Housing Authority. Athens Land Trust. Athens Land Trust.
That's Juana. She is watching on YouTube, and I'm going to send her the link. She can't find it at the moment.
Okay, great. So Juana's watching. Great. Then Athens Technical College. Anyone from Athens Technical College here? Athens U.S. Green Building Council.
Tom Lawrence.
Hey, Tom. East Athens Development Corporation.
Caleb Spencer.
Caleb. Northeast Georgia Business Alliance.
Shane said he couldn't make it.
Okay. W&A Engineering.
Amy Kassane.
Great. Then on the project team from South Face, you've got me. Who else from South Face is on today?
Bailey Shea. Aaron Gallagher.
Okay. And from Greenland Analytics?
Hey, this is Matt Cox.
Hey, Matt. And from our ex officio members, do we have anyone from Central Services? All right. What about Economic Development?
Ilka McConnell.
Hey, Ilka. The Inclusion Office?
Bill Coburn.
Hey, Crystal. Housing and Community Development?
Melinda Lord.
Melinda. And then the Sustainability Office?
It's Mike Wharton.
And Maggie Songster.
There. Is there anyone else present that I haven't called yet? All right, then we can progress to the next slide. Right, so our objectives today are to highlight some CAB engagement opportunities, recap stakeholder engagement efforts, give you a look ahead for our upcoming stakeholder engagement work, collect feedback on the community survey, and outline our objectives and key takeaways for next month's CAB meeting. Next slide. All right, this is our time breakdown on the agenda, and we're moving to CAB engagement. Thanks, Erin. So I'm going to hand things over to Mike for this portion. And Mike, I think you're muted. Still muted, Mike.
I'll catch on. We have been meeting one-on-one with, I want to remind you each that we are ready to schedule a meeting with your CAB, with you, each one of your organizations. The idea behind each one of those will be for you to bring as many people from your organization as you would like, as many or few. It will be a listening session where we'll be asking a few framing questions, but primarily wanting to hear what your organization has wants to see, any concerns, any do's, don'ts, good, bad, ugly, all of that that goes with the planning process. We do have Amy has reached out to me at this point with W&A, and also the Housing Authority has reached out. We're working on scheduling those. It'll take about an hour. So that's the first thing. So please remember to do that, and shoot me an email so we can start arranging that if you'd like for us to do that. The second thing we want to do is make sure that if you have an organizations or a group or a network that you particularly work with very closely, that you feel like we need to hear from, and you would like for us to hear from them, both of those, please let us know that as well. If you could be willing to host that meeting for us, make the contacts, I'll send out the WebEx. I myself or Maggie will send out the WebEx meeting. Again, it will be a listening session. We would be glad to either lead it ourselves and ask the questions, or have you lead it, whichever one. But we want to make sure that we take advantage of the networks you guys have as well, and that we're hearing from everyone. So remember to send us an email about your organization's meeting. We want to get your input, and also if there's another group that you'd like to pull together that goes with that. Thank you.
All right, and next slide, please. Thanks, Mike. Mike, do you want to take this one
Oh,
too?
keep going, yes. So one of the things you might have heard me at the beginning of this refer to it as the Community Advisory Board. One of the things, looking at language that our mayor and commission have been discussing, is the need to really consider moving away from the use of the word citizen and more toward the word community or constituent. If there's no questions or there's no concerns, then we will make that switch. But I did not want to make that without letting you know that this is under consideration, to get any feedback or concerns and share those with others, if there are any. If they're not, we'll just move forward.
I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
Done. I'm sorry.
I thought that was the name already. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's okay.
So I've been calling it the whole time.
That's okay. You've been ahead of us all. That's all. So if there's no other disagreement or no other concerns, like I said, if there are, you can email me as well, but we'll start making those changes in our literature. And forgive me if I forget every once in a while, mess up myself.
Yes, forgive me too if I mess up in the future. All right, so next slide. So here, I think we're missing a box, Erin. Is there maybe an animation there?
Doesn't seem to be loading, so I'm not sure if it got deleted out. Oh, there.
Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. So here's just a quick overview of timeline and what we've been working on to date this year. So we've gone ahead and starting late January, we began our charrettes and concluded them in early February. And we are now in the process of walking through those one-on-one conversations and mini charrettes with the utility and the other stakeholders that we've identified with y'all. And we plan to spend next month walking through the feedback we're getting through those conversations within those one-on-ones and charrettes, as well as conversations internal to government. So coming up in March and April, really late March, early April, we want to launch our public outreach efforts. So that's going to include these public, open to all who are interested, community conversations. as well as deploying the community survey and reporting out the results as they're coming in, and beginning to outline and develop the plan in partnership with y'all. Then through May to September, we'll continue that plan development process and iterations of the plan. And then October to December, we plan to wrap up the plan and get it presented in front of the commission. Next slide.
Megan, can I
Yeah.
ask a quick question? The list of the interview, the small ongoing stakeholder group interviews that y'all are doing right now, I don't know, has that list been finalized in the documents? I mean, I looked at it the other day and I just wasn't sure if it was the actual final list of what you're doing, so.
I cannot say that was final authority, that what's currently in the CAB folder is in fact the final list. So we'll double check that as part of our follow-up for today's meeting and resurface that link for everybody to be able to refer to.
Okay, great, thank you.
But later on in the presentation, we do have the ones that we have talked to that were on our list and did, I think, attendees. Is that correct, Megan?
Yes, for the charrette participants, yes. I think Amy might also be referencing the one-on-one list, so we'll confirm that's accurate too.
Yeah, and many of these, so there's a probably longer list that's in the CAB folder, and that was like 80 something long. And then there was the smaller list, but we've reached out to pretty much everyone on there. So I'll go ahead and check that. And you're muted, but I think we're good on this point.
I think yeah, the smaller list is what I was talking about. And I just wasn't sure if we had actually, because there were a couple of blank locations for possible additions and nothing was in there. You know, I can't remember. So.
Yeah, Mike and Maggie, along with Ilka, have been reaching out to those groups.
I'm just making a note here. All right, and then next slide, please. All right, so now we'll walk through the stakeholder work to date. So go ahead, Erin, to the next slide. I'll give you just a quick recap of information you may already have and then segue into the new information. So we've wrapped up these first 3 charrettes, which were focused on community and equity, clean energy economy, and intersection of the natural and built environment. We've outlined the number of participants. So we had 13 for the community and equity, as an example. We had 13 participants from the community with, in addition to those 13, 3 CAB members engaged and 8 staff engaged. And when we say staff, we mean like ACC Gov, as well as the South Base and Greenlink crews participating. So I'd say we were enthused with the number of participants we engaged. This is, again, part of a longer term process, and that we had some really great conversations. And we're really thankful to the CAB members here who were able to participate and really help strengthen the conversations that we had. Next slide, please. This is the list that Mike was just referencing of the organizations that participated in the conversation we had. And next slide. And this is just a recap of the kinds of questions and information. We shared this slide, or I think a slightly different formatted version of this slide with y'all last month, walking through the topics we had in mind for the charrettes, as well as the kinds of content we were presenting out and the types of feedback that we were trying to solicit from the participants. And we got good responses to these questions, as well as to questions we weren't even asking, which we've captured in the notes, which we'll be posting into the Google Drive folder. The next slide. These are the key questions that we asked across each of the 3 charrettes. We also had more targeted questions based on the charrette topic. But this is just to refresh for you guys before I move into the key findings we got through our conversations. I wanted to resurface the questions that were asked to tee up the discussions we had. And just by way of reminder, when we conducted these charrettes, we spent the first 20-ish minutes walking through some background on the plan through a presentation, identifying energy burden and some ACES information. And then we spent the duration of the 90-minute session in breakout groups with participants to help foster just an easier dialogue in smaller groups. All right, the next slide, please. So we have some common themes emerge across the charrettes, and thanks for going ahead and skipping Aaron, that was perfect timing. So these are responses that were common to all of the charrettes. So key over and over and over again through the charrettes, and that we are also starting to hear in these one-on-ones, is that there's a substantial need for education and increasing community awareness across the clean energy goal, but also just energy generally. So helping community members get a basic understanding of energy literacy, communicating effectively the county's energy priorities and solutions, as well as education on the pros and cons of the clean energy economy, going through this energy burden information and really highlighting the nature of this problem. Across the different conversations we had, people were very surprised to learn just the impact of energy costs upon residents and the degree to which the energy burden issue is a problem. We also highlighted the need in these conversations. When I say we, I mean the participants really continue to emphasize the need to engage across demographics. There is a lot of conversation around the role of elected officials, both within local government, but also effective partnerships with the state government to communicate the goals, the needs, and the benefits of this transition and dispel any misconceptions that might currently exist. The need to engage with business owners across businesses of all sizes, with homeowners, renters, schools, and marginalized communities. Next slide. The other key theme that we highlighted through the conversations that we had is the need to really deepen knowledge on the pathways to achieve this alternative energy transition. So helping push for solar panels and incentives for both residential and commercial property owners, making investments in renewable energy infrastructure and figuring out who will be paying for those investments, leveraging existing resources like CDBG funds, as well as new funding sources from the current administration, potentially future administrations, to fund these improvements, creating prime real estate for solar and EV charging, and by that we also mean eliminating some of the barriers that currently exist for those kinds of investments, as well as being open to emerging technologies as they're coming in. So things like changes in nuclear technology that might be on the horizon, battery storage, methane pyrolysis, anaerobic digestion, and other items that we might not even be aware of at this time that might emerge as really viable clean energy solutions in the decades ahead. Next slide. So now I'll go by group in terms of the kinds of responses we got. What I just highlighted was cross-cutting across all three charrettes. Now I'll talk specifically to the community and equity discussion that we had. So there is unsurprisingly a desire to prioritize equity across traditionally overlooked or marginalized communities, and ensuring that energy savings technology and equipment is affordable and available. The need to promote partnerships between building owners and tenants. I know we've gone into the landlord-tenant issues and the complexities there. Previous calls, that's obviously going to be a key priority in moving this forward. There are conversations around the need to incentivize weatherization programs further, as well as help with code enforcement to benefit resident housing quality. The need to maintain and build out affordable housing and make available home improvement opportunities such as home energy audits. And there's a lot of discussion around the high energy burdens and opportunities to highlight that through water bill mailers and energy burden maps. And there's a discussion about the ways that the city can help plug some of these gaps that currently exist to efficiency. So opportunities like the Community Energy Fund, the Land Trust, and partnerships with other organizations. Next slide. I do know these slides are kind of text heavy, so I think it might be better for me to just lift up a few key points from them. We will be circulating these later, so you can see the deeper dive into this, as well as we'll be circulating the even deeper level notes and transcripts from those conversations. So transportation also came up quite a bit in some of these conversations, so with a big emphasis on making EV technology more available, but also eliminating some of the barriers that currently exist. So for example, renters may not have easy access to EV charging. So what can the county do to help address that issue? How can we highlight early adopters and just promote education about the benefits of this and dispel any misconceptions? How can we normalize alternative transportation and move away from this car culture? There's some discussion about the potential need to reopen the zoning code and look at ways to address some of this through public transportation or just how we think about bike access and other forms of transportation, and the need to address infrastructure through public transit and otherwise. Next slide. So now going to the clean energy economy charrette discussions, there was just quite a bit of conversation around the impacts that this could have on business and how to help businesses benefit from the clean energy transition. So things like identifying incentives that the county might be able to offer, as well as really highlighting case studies of leaders that are doing this work already and telling a story about how they were able to execute and what sorts of benefits they might be realizing as a result, to help really just feed further into the need for ongoing education, as well as tying into workforce development and job training needs. So next slide. With regard to the intersection of the natural and built environment discussion, we got a lot of conversation around the need for strategic master plan around tree cover, land incorporation, greenscaping, as well as around stormwater and land use. So once again, zoning came up. And I'd also say a cross-cutting theme across all three charrettes was the need for interdepartmental cooperation or coordination as we're achieving this, because it's not just weatherization of homes. We're looking at initiatives that are going to touch a lot of different enforcement agencies within ACC government. And then next slide. So here are some common concerns that we heard across the charrettes. So focusing in on equity, there's a lot of concerns around career displacement and a desire to ensure that this is a just transition. There are also concerns around the ability to address this landlord-tenant issue and how to effectively engage landlords to ensure that building level improvements are made so that tenants can benefit from those improvements. There are concerns around energy burden potentially being exacerbated if clean energy does lead to increased energy costs and the need to address that. With regard to energy policy, the political landscape in Georgia certainly remains a challenge, and coordination with state entities such as the Public Service Commission as well as the state legislature is going to be key. There are concerns around the ability that Athens has to influence the energy generation sources that it uses, which again feed into that state government interaction. And there were some questions about other technologies that could be prime energy sources that weren't explicitly identified within the definition of clean and renewable energy in the original clean energy resolution, and nuclear was one example that came up. Also, people had reservations about the potential use of renewable energy credits as a compliance pathway for the county to achieve this transition. And there are also concerns on the part of business for costs for what sorts of challenges this would pose to their ability to affordably do business within Athens-Clarke County, and the need for well-designed incentives to be made available. And across all of these, a desire for each of these sectors to be at the table as decisions are being made. Next slide. Additional concerns, the need to just ensure that quality workforce development is available to help further this just transition, the need for continued education and energy literacy. Some concerns / opportunities that were highlighted included a conversation around how a stormwater utility fee may be a pathway here, and that tree maintenance and cover needs to be preserved if not maximized. And also would be concerns around transportation and the current barriers that exist to EV adoption and otherwise. Next slide. So looking ahead to what's coming next, late March, early April, we're going to start executing these 5 community conversations, which will be open to the public, done virtually, and scheduled across various different times of day to allow for maximum attendance. We'll be launching the community survey. There are also some materials that were surfaced early on in the CAB meeting days last fall that include the mailer and radio PSA. We're going to be resending that to you because it's been 5 months and we'd appreciate your feedback on the current, quote unquote, currency of the content that was generated then. And or if there's a need to revisit to make sure that it's tailored towards the audience of today. I know in the normal world, 5 months wouldn't seem that long, but these days. And then also there's just going to be ongoing feedback between the plan writing and development and ensuring that we're incorporating the community priorities within this plan as we're moving forward. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to go into community survey feedback. Next slide. So
Hey,
our goal
Megan,
for this exercise.
Not to, sorry to break the rhythm. Just want to double check with anybody and see if they had any questions about the material the information we presented back from the stakeholder charrettes that were conducted. And if there's anything anybody had, they felt like they wanted to contribute to that.
And I just made a note to myself to check the cab, Google Drive or whatever. So all the presentations are in there, and then the notes that y'all took are also in there. Is that right?
I don't know about the notes. Let me ask that. I mean, one of the things, there will be a little bit of gap on some of the notes. For example, our business notes, the business leaders, we're still actually interviewing those. We have about 12 businesses and industries that we're interviewing. We weren't going to put the individual notes in there because part of our goal is to scrub any kind of identifiers and look at it thematically what the businesses and industries are saying. And so we're going to be compiling all of those notes together into an overview of that group.
I was at the community charrette. I haven't had a chance to look, and I just didn't know if, the PowerPoint presentations that y'all gave, and then I think, there were notes written up that weren't, I don't know, I can't remember what was going to be in the cab folder, because I just would like to go back and read through some of those.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? No, I was just to say, can you speak to that? So, because Megan and Bailey and Aaron, just to make sure, because I think the notes are going to be in there.
So the notes, the slides, and the recordings just of the presentation portion, not of the breakouts, were shared with everyone that participated in the charrettes already, including the cab members that attended the charrettes, but it hasn't been dropped in the cab folder. That's part of our follow-up materials, so we'll drop that after today's meeting so that all of the cab can see it. And like Mike said, we for the charrettes, those are the notes took a little bit of time because we wanted to kind of synthesize them, because a lot of people said the same things in the breakouts, and anonymize them. But to answer your question, yes, they've been shared, not with everyone yet, and they're coming.
Bailey, do y'all have an idea of when you'll get them in there?
By end of week, today, tomorrow. That'll be part of like the various follow-up materials we have in our cab follow-up email.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. Go ahead, Megan, unless other people have a question.
I have something to add. Something that struck me concerning equity in one of the breakout was Olivia Amato, who I guess works for the Athens area homeless shelter, and she was talking about the energy burden on people and how energy reductions for them were a future concern when they had more immediate needs. And it really struck me as we move forward and we're considering different things, that not only is targeting important, but also removing hurdles is important, so that people don't have to do a lot of work in order to participate in something that is designed for them to participate in. Which I think was a really important point that she didn't say explicitly, but it's how it came across to me, as well as her. She said that she had a lot of relationships with landlords, especially for properties that low-income residents live in, and offered to be a liaison if there was need to bring those folks into a conversation. So that's something to consider.
And I'm realizing in retrospect, it would have been really valuable for us to write into the agenda a chance for the CAB members that participated in these charrettes to share reflections. So if anyone does have anything they'd like to share now based on the conversations they participated in, please go ahead and jump in. All right, then we'll go ahead and move on into the survey. Thank you. So a recap of or I guess to go ahead and state the goals for this exercise that we're moving into right now is to fill you in a bit more and provide some more context for how we came up with these survey questions, the motivations for the structure and desired effectiveness of this survey, as well as to get your feedback and to gauge your interpretation as an outside party of the survey broadly. Thank you for the feedback that we've received so far. It's been really helpful in helping us tee up this conversation for today, as well as will be helpful for survey adjustments. I want to go ahead and say that I know this survey is an initial survey. There may be future ones if we identify a need for it. And really what we wanted to do here is get an idea of where the community is. And part of that involves seeing where there's support, but also part of that is seeing where there's strong opposition to just help us gauge what might even be potential non-starters. Because I know through the conversations that we have in our own lives and with our own networks, I think a lot of us have a pretty strong sense based on that, what some of the options are and where the sentiment might be. That we really want to make sure that we're giving Mike's team all the ammunition they need in terms of feedback, direct answers to questions, and can really just communicate as best we can to elected officials as we're developing this plan. What would have popular support, what wouldn't, what will work for the community, what won't. And so there are questions here that might represent policies that maybe aren't going to be good pathways at all, but we want to hear the community tell us that so that we just have all the information available at our disposal possible. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Matt from Greenlink Analytics, who led the development of the survey.
Thanks, Megan. So I started to pull together materials here on just giving us an overview of general survey hygiene. So there's a science to this, and there's also a piece of this that's art, and I'm sure that you've all heard that before. But I went ahead and just tried to create something that would walk us through what are the main things that you want to do in terms of, like, why are you doing this? Like, what's the overall purpose of doing this? And then how should we go about designing a survey, getting it into community, learning what we're interested in learning. So the details here are kind of just starting at a very high level. Any kind of survey that you put together, the purpose is going to be to gather generalizable information at a population level, but from a smaller sample. You know, this is how you avoid having to ask every single person what they think about something, right? So to do that, you're going to have a combination of attributes. So some are going to be descriptive, things like race, gender, income, education levels, those kinds of demographic data. And then other things are going to be more analytical. So what are the things that you're interested in understanding, and what are the things that you're interested in exploring relationships between? So this is where like some more of the advanced statistics and correlations might come into play. Generally, you're asking questions about one of two things, either characteristics or experiences. And so that'll be true if we're going through like an interview protocol or a survey questionnaire, any of those kinds of things, like that will apply to both. Key questions that we have to ask, and you probably would want to ask if you were going to be rigorous about any survey that you looked at. You know, who is being studied here? How is the sample population being identified? How are they being selected? So they call that the sample frame. How do you get pulled into the survey and into the study? How is that data then going to be collected? You know, do you have very experienced researchers that are running a piece of this, or do you have interns that you're going to throw out to make it go, like those can make a difference. And then is the survey ongoing, that's just open-ended and we're collecting information forever? Or is this a one-time affair? And the last piece here, which is key to keep in mind, if we're going to derive valid conclusions, then we need to pay attention to a few things. So we need to know, first and foremost, what's the purpose and the objectives that we're pursuing? Like, why are we doing this? And what's the point of asking the questions that we're asking? You know, that's kind of your North Star to guide us through the process. Second one is that sample selection and the data collection. You know, who are we bringing in? How are we going to get to those people? And then the last one that kind of builds off of those first two, how do we construct our questions to make sure that we get reliable answers? And how do we want to design the instrument itself, the survey, the questionnaire itself? And so there's, the first two have a little more of that kind of hard science, rigorous piece to it. And the last one is where you get a little bit more of the art coming in. Okay, so if we get to the next slide. So on purpose, what are the objectives of the survey? So I think in our case, we'll step through that in more detail in a little bit. But what we're broadly looking to do, or at least what I think we're looking to do with the survey, is to understand public values that are related to the goal, to the clean energy goal, understand the public level of awareness and support for the goal, as well as awareness and support of existing clean energy options, understand the opinions and the preferences of our population regarding policy actions and energy resources. And then we also want to make sure we've gathered sufficient descriptive data, that demographic data, to enable us to generalize from our sample to the Athens population. Next slide. So on the sample selection and collection side of things, gold standard for this would be a randomized sample. So if you knew there were 100,000 people and you knew what all their demographics were, and you had like a Rolodex that contained everybody, you'd be able to go through and individually pick out folks who matched that target population. And if your random sample included, just happened to not be representative there, you could replace some of those to make it so that you had, the perfect sample population. If you're not in a situation where you have all of that kind of information available, which is generally rare outside of an academic setting that you have that, and even then it's only like really well-funded academic surveys that do get to do that, your next best option is going to require weighting the respondents. And so in that case, you need a lot more information about their demographic profiles so that you can weight the responses that they provide to make it so that in total, you get an aggregate response that does reflect the makeup of the community. You do have potential issues of sampling with any of these, because the things that you have control over in your sample construction are a lot more of those demographic data points, not necessarily making sure you have ideological diversity across your sample set. So there's always a chance that may go well and it may not go well. And so part of the main solution to that is just to increase the number of people in the sample, so that you normally refer to that as N, but you want to increase the N of your sample size. And that's going to make it so that you, at least as statistics go, you get closer to the law of large numbers and you're going to see what the general trend is. And then the last thing for a survey like ours, where it's a one-time survey, you want to collect as much of that information as quickly as you can, because opinions are going to change over time. So if we leave it open for 6 months or a year, you're going to invite questions about validity for the things that were collected in January versus what happened in December. So all the surveys of this kind are going to be snapshots of some sort. And if you have the equivalent of a long exposure picture that's being painted for you, some of the stuff you got early may not be true anymore by the time that you're doing your actual analysis. So this is kind of towards the end as far as the general overview goes, but this is the last parts here on how to build your questions and how to build the survey itself. You want to avoid leading or biased questions. So your questions, you don't want to seed the answer that you're looking for into the question that you're asking to the extent possible. That probably strikes most people as common sense, but it's an important thing to make sure that that's the case. You want to choose question formats that basically force your survey respondents into an answer type that you want. So I put down an example here that's really common. So a Likert scale is one of those scales that's like rank from 1 to 4, or not supportive, somewhat supportive, kind of, you know, radio buttons that you'll see on surveys. And there's debates around, you know, whether you should use 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 of those radio buttons in that kind of survey. If you wanted to use this kind of thinking, if you wanted to force someone to make a decision, you felt that there wasn't really, you know, a totally neutral, I don't have an opinion on this type of answer that everybody leans one way or the other, then a 4-point scale is great, because you can't pick 3. There's not that middle option available. So if you want to force a decision, then the 4 point's great for that. If you think that there is the potential for, I don't know, no opinion, totally neutral, then 5 point, you know, is a good response. You want to design questions that will align with your controls and weight. So this is critical if you don't have that randomized control where you got to pick all the people who are your respondents. For us, this generally means alignment with the way that census asks their question. So there may be things that we want to include or not, but census has provided us with a wealth of information around what the demographics are that we can tack onto to make our results generalizable. But that also constrains us some in the way we can ask some of those descriptive questions. The design, you want the survey to flow. This is another one of those kind of art points to it. But if you jump around, it can feel very, what's the right word for that? Discombobulated. It can feel jarring to go through the survey. And so like the goal is to actually make this more of like a smooth process where someone can follow a consistent train of thought through the survey instrument. Last two that we've got here are know your audience. Oh, sorry, back one, please. Know your audience to gauge the appropriate time to complete. If we're not paying people to take the survey, then they're volunteering their time. And so you don't want to hand somebody a 30-minute or a 45-minute survey for something that they're not being compensated for. It becomes a bit onerous. And then the last one is you want to test the instrument before you have full deployment. So even after you think you've done all of this, you want to select a group of people, have them take the survey, and see how that worked. You know, how did that apply? And what do you learn? You almost always end up learning something that you need to tweak when you go through that testing phase. Okay. So I plugged in some answers here on what I think we're attempting to do. I've walked through that purpose answer, but you know, we want to know what the public values are. We want to understand those levels, current levels of education and awareness, as well as opinions and preferences on the different policy side. And then we want to have enough descriptive data so that we can generalize. answering some of those earlier questions, our target population are the residents of Athens. Our collection will go through this one-time digital questionnaire. And then our instrument, the good news on this one is that the survey has been tested both in like pre-trial, pre-deployment phases, but it's also been used in multiple jurisdictions at this point. So this survey's been through its paces.
All right, so thank you, Matt. So now we'll start the guided exercise of walking through some questions to get your all's feedback on this. So our first question is, based on your review of the survey, do you feel it supports the goal of the exercise of employing the survey effectively?
Yes. I mean, that was what I had in my notes when I was going over that question that was sent out. Those two things, assessing the level of education and assessing community support for specific policies. So I suppose, yes, it does seem to do that.
I think somewhat. There were a couple that I had some questions about, and I think might be a little biased one direction that I would love for us to talk about a little bit.
Okay. I think in another slide we'll be teeing up the specific question discussion. So I guess, did anyone else have some initial thoughts on just the survey, the first question here about if it's helping us achieve the goal we've set for it? Okay, then I'll move on to our next question here, which is just, what about the structure of the survey do you like or dislike?
I guess one observation is that it mentions some specific policies for the commercial, retail, and business side, but it really doesn't on the residential side. It's almost softer on the residential side. Like, would you be willing to spend $15 more a month? Whereas some of the things that, some of the implications of the policies that we're asking people to weigh in on the commercial side are much more expensive, but and just in terms of equity, thinking about who is going to do what and what might it cost them and what might the trade-offs be. I think that's one where I think, I guess I have some concerns.
And to Ilka's point, follow up on that real quick. One of the interesting questions or observations that she and I have been getting and talking to the business community is trying to nail down what they consider a good ROI. What is it that they are looking for when they say that's a good thing for us to invest in and not?
Yeah, but wouldn't an ROI for a business person be different perspective than something like, I mean, I understand what you would ask, but it might be different.
Between business and residential?
Or I'm just thinking more of a community project like this. And residential too, yes. I mean, many businesses, if they don't get a payback in 3 years or something like that, they're not even going to think about it because who knows? They may not mean business 3 years from now.
And that's one of the things I don't know if that's a supplement or a question, or we just, because of that, we don't do it. But I do think that that's true, that there are different, and that sometimes creates that kind of difference. I think in the way we think about things, if we think in residential terms, or we think in business terms, or we think in public project terms, it's kind of the ROI is different for each one of those of what I wonder if that's not different depending on your perspective.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not a bad question to ask. It just, you got to put it in perspective.
Is that a
Yeah,
question that might, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask on the ROI question, since that might vary so much, is that a question that might be best kind of asked in a kind of a conversational stakeholder environment through some of these conversations Mike and Ilka are having? Or is there, do you think there's a way to tee it up within this survey that would make sense?
I like that question. That's a great question, Megan. Maybe there's a question that precedes the one, but like precedes question 6, maybe, or maybe even at the beginning that says, are you a business owner? You know, because I think there's a question in here that says, do you own your home? Do you rent your home? Just so you can understand someone's positionality when they're answering a question, because just not just as a resident, but as a resident, you know, everyone has an opinion about the place where they live, you know, their apartment, their home, wherever it is that they rest their head at night. But not everyone owns a business. And so while you can answer a question about how much you personally are willing to pay additionally a month for your own personal expenses for clean and renewable energy, I guess asking people to weigh in on what they think should be required of businesses, everybody has a different perspective about that. And the scale is so different, right?
Mm.
And to piggyback on that, and it didn't occur to me to just now, if we ask them to answer just one, so if you're a business owner, for example, but you're also a homeowner in Athens, you might be one or the other or both. It'd be great if they could fill out one for each of their perspectives. So maybe you can only answer one, but if we have some note that says if you want to take a second one from a different perspective, a homeowner's perspective, I don't know. That's didn't occur to me to just now, bouncing off what Ilka was saying.
Maybe that's something that could be done through like the online survey technology of if you click on, if you're a business owner, that just opens up some questions that would become visible that you wouldn't see if you'd answered, no, I'm not a business owner.
I'm gonna throw one more idea out. Do we need to have a different questionnaire for business and industry owners and just do it differently? Although I don't know how we would necessarily communicate that to them so they wouldn't feel like we were slighting them or not including them.
And you don't capture the one that's both that you just talked about a couple minutes ago, or they only get one or the other. You know.
Yeah. I do like the idea of if you click business owner that it will open up some business questions.
Yeah. So, gonna ask Matt a question quickly, since I wanted to kind of lean on him to just let us know if some of these question changes might impact some of the analysis end of things. So, Matt, in terms of this thought of adding some business owner questions, are there any downsides to that from your perspective?
The only thing is that it may make the survey longer to take for certain folks, because I think the intent would be that we want to know, we would still be interested in everybody's opinion as residents. So I don't know that you would get any fewer questions to business owners as because you'd also want their feedback as a resident. So it's just my main thought would just be you're adding time and you just want to be aware of how much more you're asking them to do. But as far as the validity of the instrument or anything like that, I don't think it hurts the survey or the statistics.
I mean, I think businesses would appreciate that opportunity. I mean, if you ask them a bunch of open-ended questions where they have to write something, I mean, that's one thing. But I think that a lot of businesses might you know, if they look at the surveys and feel like, well, they're not really getting to my issues, you know, or how I can contribute. So I think businesses would not, my guess would not mind having a few specific questions targeted at them. I think they'd appreciate it, so.
So I'm gonna go back to some finer points on the structure of the survey, but I do want to say I would have concerns if we're going to target a survey to business owners. I mean, you're talking about a relatively small slice of the Athens-Clarke County community when you say that, and I think that you might have the possibility of kind of junking up the data, because how are you going to weight that? And their concerns versus residents' concerns, especially since their concerns are probably going to be much more pointed, and they'll feel much stronger about certain things, and residents may not even consider those things or the impact that it may have on them. So I think that that's something that would have to be done very, very carefully. And I'm a business owner, like I run a small business, so I'm not saying this as somebody who doesn't understand that. So that's my feeling on that. I do want to talk about a couple things just about the structure of the survey. So there are some things about it that are a little bit clunky and inconsistent in my mind. For example, right off the bat, question 1, we ask how people know about the survey. And then in question 2, one of the options is, I was not previously aware. And so if you had already answered that question, I'm not sure why we have that in there. And so it seems like we may not know what we're talking about when we throw that out there to begin with. And then there are some questions where they have a couple options that seem to be analogous to one another. Like in question 4, we have more expensive as an option, but we say affordable versus more affordable. Those are two very different kind of concepts. And so I don't know whether we want to balance that. If we're going to say more expensive, we would say more affordable. Similarly, question 16 and 17, in 17, we're asking about switching from natural gas, and we give people an option that they would not switch from natural gas. They just wouldn't do it. But in 16, we talk about switching to electric vehicles. We don't give them the option of, I'm somebody who is going to burn gas for as long as I want. I'm not going to switch to an EV. So there's those sort of inconsistencies that I wonder if correcting that might clean it up a little bit.
Great. How about we take those one by one, Michael? So I think your first comment was on question 4, is that right? So it was the more expensive versus more affordable. So Matt, what do you think about that?
I think that's fine. I mean, there's no issue in terms of putting those both on the footing of more expensive or more affordable. Reinforces the relative nature of the decision.
Okay. Any objections from anyone for making that change? All right. Then there was question number 16 was also flagged in 17. So Matt, in terms of those, any downside to going ahead and just aligning them with one another in terms of structure?
No, not really. I don't think so. I mean, I think that's another one where you might be, I mean, I understand why they wouldn't necessarily have been connected initially, just in the sense that people seem really attached to those gas stoves and view them almost like, so it's the idea of, do you have a substitute good or do you have complementary goods from economics that would come in there? And it's like, you see that, I think, with the gas home appliances sometimes. I think we're just hearing that you might have a group of folks who have that same thought process around wanting to roll coal or whatever with their trucks. So I don't see a problem with that one either. we want to make sure we get the wording right as far as putting together the option, but that's a solvable, you know, the template for it's in the next question. Just would not switch, get you what you need.
Okay. Cool. And then I think Michael also flagged something about 1 and 2. And then like question 1 is how do you know about the survey? But question 2 has I'm not previously aware. So feeding into that, or did you know about the county? So Matt, how would you recommend we process that?
I think there's a difference. So my only comment there would be that there's a difference between whether you had this as a paper questionnaire that was also available or whether it was digital. So in the digital one, yeah, totally go ahead and mark it out. On the paper one, sometimes there is a little bit of a benefit of having that there, and especially if you do anything with folks who are not primarily English speakers. That's, you know, English is a second language for them. I'm not 100% sure as to the rationale for why, but we've run the survey in Spanish and Mandarin as well. And those populations have just been more comfortable with that option being there. I think the English reaction is pretty similar to what was brought up. That, you know, I said no before, and my answer to the second one is going to be the first one, of course.
Okay. So Michael, given that information, how do you feel about leaving it as is? You have that added context. And I say that with the caveat that this will be the largely digital. I think we need to talk about if we want a paper version, but I think in a digital version, it would be pretty simple to go ahead and just do exactly what Matt described of having number 2 only, like not populate if you said you weren't aware.
Yeah, that seems fine. I will claim no knowledge to how a Mandarin speaker would respond to it. I am solely English. So.
All right. Then, Ilka, I know I skipped over some of your feedback, which I think was applying to question 5. So you mentioned that I think question 6 was the one I was referencing, where you mentioned there's some specific examples of policies that would affect commercial owners, but not necessarily residential. Would a good way of addressing that be for us to just add a few residential policy examples to this table to balance it out?
Yeah, but just thinking, how would that, I guess we just have to think what would be the equivalent in residential be? You know, how would you, for a new building, you know, you would do code. And I guess if you were doing renovations to an existing building or home, you would maybe pull a permit. Hopefully you'd pull a permit, but maybe not.
Yeah.
You know, and how would you do that? Implement clean and renewable energy upgrades. What would be the enforcement mechanism for residential homes? You know, for a business, you know, I'm not sure how you would do that either, other than maybe have them inspected before getting their business license or paying their occupation tax. So I think we'd really, I mean, these are very specific policies. So, I mean, I almost maybe think we go to slightly more vague wording if we're going to do it that direction, than coming up with something so specific, because it assumes that this will be a regulatory approach on, you know, and are we going to do a regulatory approach for residents as well as for businesses? And how would that actually be implemented when the rubber hits the road?
So I guess, I mean, I had some concerns about question 6 as well. I mean, it doesn't necessarily just apply to commercial or businesses, question 6, does it? I mean, I didn't read it in that way.
Right. You're right. I mean, it says buildings, right? But
right.
If you were a person reading it, how would you think of a building? Like a home is a building, but some people might think when they're reading, you know, when they read these items, I mean, would you read it as a home of some kind, as a multifamily development, as a storefront?
I just kind of read it as anything, any building But I mean, I definitely had concerns about, I mean, my concern kind of was that we're asking people to say, how important do you think it is for Athens-Clarke County to do these things? And it's like, my point was like, the first and fourth options are things that, well, it's Athens-Clarke County doing those things. They're providing incentives or they're providing education. But 2 and 3 are about requiring a burden to a property owner or whoever. And so to me, those 2 questions, you have to be really careful. You know, when the second one require that all existing buildings implement clean and renewable energy upgrades, and it's like, well, man, if that were possible, I'd say yes, but one, I don't think it's even feasible. So I just think there's issues with that question. And then with the third one, my concern, I mean, I think with the establish an ambitious legally required energy performance code for new buildings, I mean, that's, you know, that's a great idea. But I'm afraid that you're going to get some people who are just going to be no way, because they're going to see it as just government overreach. And I'm not sure that you'll get at the nuances to how there might be people who are supportive of it, but it depends. You know, so I don't know, I just feel like those 2 questions, it's going to be, if you're a gung-ho advocate, you'll probably say absolutely. But I'm just not sure how much you're going to really, what kind of.
And what will that, I hear you.
Go ahead, Elko.
No, I just was saying, I hear you. It's like I just clicked on what you were saying, and I think that makes sense. And what are the unintended consequences of that as well? Like for existing buildings versus new buildings, and are those regulations different? And what is that? I know we're way down in the weeds, but if it's going to be a regulatory approach, the weeds are important, right?
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ilka.
No, I mean, basically I was done.
One of the things that occurs to me is in listening, does it seem like there's 3 different areas that we're trying to gather information on? One is, what should Athens-Clarke County itself do? So what should the government be doing? One is, what are we asking of our residents? And then the other would be, what are we asking of business and industry? So is there a need to approach this particular area with that kind of questioning?
I kind of wonder. I mean, I think 6 is a problematic question as well, and I think, you know, even though 6 and 5 are structured similarly, you know, 5 is really it's kind of asking about social relationships within the community, whereas 6 is a pretty technical question. I mean, if you read it as it's written, you're saying, you know, which of these policies are going to be the most effective way to get to 100%, you know, clean renewable energy in Athens-Clarke County and buildings, and it's like, well, that's a pretty technical question. And it seems as though what we're actually wanting to know is people's appetite for different policies. And so and beyond that, it seems like it is heavily skewed against increasing building codes, because it, you know, in that one, in number 3, it uses ambitious and legally required, which is much stronger language than appears in any of the other ones, and seems to be designed to, as Amy said, you know, elicit a negative response. So that one sounds pejorative to me. I mean, we have a question later about bias. That one sounds like a bias question to me. And it may be just because I'm in favor of better energy codes, but
well, and honestly, one of the things we are struggling with in the questions is we would like, I think it's important for us to understand the level of appetite. And if there's a really strong backlash in the community for strengthening building codes, then that's going to be an important thing to know. If there's a really strong support, or if that support is very strong in the residential area and not in the business area. So all of those are kind of, how do we get to, I think that's what, to your point, Michael, that's what we're trying to get, is that appetite and attitude toward that regulation.
But I just don't think the responses to these, you're not going to know where people are coming from. And I think so it's going to be very different. I mean, I think.
What would help us get there?
I mean, I think that there has to be some acknowledgement maybe of, And maybe I think it might be best to separate the questions of, what are the things, this hopefully is just a, yeah, let's do it question, but should Athens-Clarke County educate people? Should they provide incentives? Separate those from the things from those policy questions, have the policy questions separate, and maybe somehow preface them with some sort of assurance that there are things that Athens-Clarke County might have to do before you can require, all new buildings to do certain things. That this isn't just okay, we're going to pass this plan tomorrow, we're going to require all these things. I don't understand what all goes into it, but I feel like that's just a really loaded question, and I don't think the responses to that question are going to tell us much of anything.
Well, let me try to unpack for a second on there. One of the main things that's being brought to this is that there's fundamentally three kinds of policy options. You have regulatory, financial, and information-based policy options. And this question asks about all of them, right? So the first thing is asking the question about incentives, which is going to be, financial. So we may decide that we want to reframe some of these, and I'm not saying that these are perfect, but just as far as like a framing is how this goes. The first question is trying to say, do you want us to throw money at the problem? We're not requiring anybody to do anything. You just want us to make more money available to make the upgrades. Second and the third are trying to gauge that regulatory option. Do you want us to apply mandates to all of the existing buildings? Is that where you want the emphasis to be? The third one is saying, well, instead of applying to all existing buildings, we're only going to look at new construction. And so we're going to have, it's still a regulatory thing, but we're looking just at code. And anybody who's already here, you're grandfathered in. You don't need to worry about somebody coming back around. And then the last one is that information-based component. Do we need to do education? And is that how you'd prefer us to go about this? Is that we see that there's more of that information provided to community and you get folks to roll in that direction?
Matt,
yeah.
I'm sorry. My first reaction is that when you say it that way, that makes sense. That you would actually divide the question up based on that. There's various approaches Athens-Clarke County can take to this process, and it includes these three things. Tell us how you feel about each one, these sub areas under each one of these three things. I would get that.
And I think at this level, at this, again, can't predict how knowledgeable people are going to be who take the survey. So that's always a difficult one. But I think being less specific is better. That do you want Athens-Clarke County to throw money at this? Yes or no? Do you, and regulatory, to be specific, because the thing is, you've asked two questions about the regulatory options. People are going to use their imaginations about how far or how far those go. And the fact is, we're not going to get to where we're not going to get to where we need to be if we don't use some regulatory options. We're just not. So in that way, it's kind of a false, okay, fine, you can answer it however you want to, but we're going there. So, it doesn't matter. So that to me is a little bit troublesome. Again, what kind of information that we gather is legitimate to inform what we're doing. And, if you ask people, well, what do you think is a renewable resource? And they say, oh, burning diesel fuel or burning whatever, well, are we going to go there because the majority of people thought that would? No. So I think we have to, I just think, we want to be sure that the questions that we're asking, we're going to propose some regulatory options. I'd be willing to bet, that's going to happen no matter what people, there's a lot of people come back and say, no, then we're going to say to ourselves, we've got to do more education. We've got to think about this. We've got to think about how this phases out, how we educate people. We're not going to say, okay, no regulatory options. That's my feeling.
Do you think it's valuable though to have that information on what people's attitudes are? I mean, at least you kind of know how to frame up your responses and know what the landmines are that are coming.
But I mean, I guess my feeling about public input has always been, if someone's not well informed, then how valid is their input? I don't mean that their opinion doesn't matter, but just how valid is that input in informing what you do? Doesn't mean you don't want their input. No, you just want their informed input. So I think when you ask a question, you just have to be, again, I think especially I think both of those people are going to use their imaginations as to what kind of regulation you're talking about. And
Would it make more sense as Matt explained it? Does it resonate a little better and allow for more detailed responses? I mean, detailed questions if it's divided up into regulatory, financial, and informational?
I'm sorry, I'm just wondering, because this is a broad community survey and there will be people taking this who might not be familiar with what the regulatory options might be, it might be necessary to some extent to outline some examples like what are put in here. I mean, we might frame it differently, but I think asking people if they're in favor of regulation to advance clean energy, they might not know what that means or what the impact might be, and if it means like energy efficiency in homes and otherwise. So I think there's some value to spelling a little bit of this out.
Yeah, and to Amy's point, it's pretty much a gut reaction to say no to regulation.
I mean, I'd be interested for others to weigh in, but I mean, I'd be tempted with the regulatory question to almost put it more in terms of, in order to achieve, let's be honest, in order to achieve the goal, there will likely have to be, regulatory things put in place and list some options, but and then maybe, what is your reaction to that? How do you react to that? Hell no, I don't want any regulations. Sorry, I guess this is being filmed anyway.
But Amy, I hear what you're saying in terms of using the survey questions as a way of sort of, when you do a survey, it creates expectations, right? It almost starts to shape how you're thinking about something. So if we do think that the regulatory piece will be a piece of it, and it likely will be, then it makes, then it does make sense to mention it, at least in some form, although maybe not specifically. And Megan, I also hear your point, which is maybe you have a header that says regulations, and then you have, for example, and then just have a couple of more general examples so people know what that kind of means.
And what about timing? I mean, would it make a difference? Because if I thought you were going to put a regulation in tomorrow as opposed to 5 years from now, I might have a very different attitude.
Yeah, you could do it in terms of ask the question, and it might be, well, yes, I understand regulations are necessary, but I want more information. Or, I'm okay with more regulations as long as, you could have the responses be a little more nuanced than just, yeah, I really like it, no, I don't like it.
As long as they're phased in over time with some.
Yeah, I don't know. That may be too complicated at this point. I don't know, but I do worry about that. I just worry about us getting an extremely negative response to this whole thing, and then but we're like, oh yeah, 90% of people said they didn't want them, but we're doing them. I mean, we're just setting ourselves up for that, I think.
I'll comment on that a little bit, and then I'll hand it over to Matt potentially, because I think he might have some recommended ways of reframing this, so we can run by you. But I'll just say we've done some of these surveys across many jurisdictions, and we've seen others administrate similar sorts of surveys across others. And I hear your concern about people seeing this and be like, oh no, mandates are coming, I should be concerned. But that's not something that really seems to come up with the community members.
It will probably with the businesses though. I would think that, and that's why I wonder if we don't need to separate out government, residential, and business and industry. I'll shut up.
I was just going to say, from what I'm hearing, like, we can definitely add a little bit more onto the front end of the question to say something about, you know, policies come in 3 different flavors. Here's our Neapolitan ice cream. You know, let's get into that. Because the intent is really just to kind of understand what the appetite is for those general approaches. And then around the regulatory, the 2 regulatory components, I think especially that third one, that's certainly the first time that I'm hearing the sensitivity to ambitious and legally required as a negative, but I don't think it hurts us to try to, you know, reframe that to make sure that we're responsive here. I think we still want to note a difference between something that applies to all, you know, all buildings and something that's only going to be rolled in as a part of code compliance. So I think the distinction's worthwhile to maintain, but we can try to pick some words that we think might not be so leading in that third one. Does that sound like we're rowing in the same direction here?
I mean, I think that gauging the appetite, you know, along those 3 pathways is a good goal. Like I said, I just see, I would like to see the language being a little bit more neutral, especially for 3. Back to your point, Mike, about phasing in over time. You know, I kind of wonder when you talk about increasing energy codes, you know, there is some sort of threshold where increasing energy codes actually lowers cost of ownership and to a point. And if you couched it that way, like, well, what if, you know, codes were increased until the cost of ownership of your house, or, you know, cost of living in your apartment, or however, you know, I don't think we need to get into those weeds, but I think that is a you know, an indication of more of the reality of the situation, as opposed to just like increasing energy codes. Like there are these follow through things that happen when that happens, and that's different for, say, a residential builder versus someone who's going to buy a house. You know, it's very beneficial to someone who buys a house, maybe not so much to a residential builder, which is why Georgia has really lagging energy codes.
I also think it's important for us to try to figure out, does the public, for example, should, not that it's because the SPLOST we just passed is 12 years, but, you know, what is there an appetite to basically say or develop a policy for all the Athens-Clarke County buildings to be that much further ahead? I mean, what if the community says we think SPLOST should be spent or dollars should be spent to make you have a 0 carbon footprint? You know, I mean, that's our goal for every building you build from now on, or every building you renovate should be targeting that. Well, that's a different kind of monetary impact on a SPLOST. So I don't, do we want to gather things so that, I guess I come back to, if Athens-Clarke County is leading the way or setting the example and kind of proving the ability of this to work with its own facilities, is there an appetite among the public to allocate funding that way? And to what extent? I don't know, maybe, am I again too far down in the weeds?
Well, I have a couple. Oh, please go first.
I wanted to ask a question that might be just a little bit, you know, off here, but I'm wondering if the function of this survey is not only to gather some critical data and context, but also as a vehicle to begin educating our residents, even as the survey is being administered. So, for example, a person may not know what biogas means, or a person may not know what hydropower means, or a person might see the phrase environmental propaganda and wonder if we're maybe talking about another country, you know, or like what exactly are we, you know, referring to? Even sort of taking a look at, you know, for example, just throwing it out there, question 2, for example, what if it read, if you answered yes to the question above, how much do you support this goal? Instead of, to what extent do you support it? And maybe it's a lot or a little, or, and I think because of the varying audiences and because it's not necessarily one specific niche audience, it's critical that the language be as accessible as possible, but also that the framing of it educate the recipient of the survey so that people are empowered to respond. Just a thought to share.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Crystal. I think the survey is an opportunity. It's as much an opportunity to educate people as it is for us to get information back from people. And that, yeah, I mean, I just think that's really important. I have a couple of comments and a couple of questions along those lines of how we can make sure that as we ask the question, we're also giving people information. So yeah, I think it's a really good opportunity. So I agree completely with what Crystal's saying.
Matt, what do you think?
Well, all right, I hate to be the negative response there, but I feel like we can direct folks to resources on education, but using the survey to do that is a tricky thing to try to introduce because it's difficult to avoid that moving in some direction that might be perceived as advocacy or that is advocacy. And if we're trying to avoid, the attempt is to avoid biasing the results that we get. I think there's a lot of great things that are out on the website already, and that people are going to communicate back. A number of times folks get directed to surveys like this after they've participated in something that was more educational as well, that gives some more of that context. And I wouldn't be opposed to putting in, links where people could go get some information as a, right, like you just dropped into the chat there, Mike, that, there might be some links in the digital survey that they can go explore. But if we have a lot of folks who don't know what a certain thing is, and that's what they respond to us, like that's actionable information for us. I think if we start to load up the survey with a lot of that, it can start to become bulky and take a significant more amount of time to work through. So I would just be a little cautious about adding a lot of the educational material if our primary objectives are around public values, awareness, and support for different options.
I think I definitely understand that challenge. I guess one concern that just comes to mind is that there's a pretty significant socioeconomic divide within our locality. And so one of the pieces that I think is pretty critical, especially if we're not aiming, specific surveys at specific audiences, is I certainly don't want to facilitate bias, but we also don't want to create a scenario where people are not providing their feedback simply because they don't necessarily have the tools that they need to understand how to provide that informed feedback. And I think ideally it would lead to simplifying and streamlining. I certainly would not envision, a 50-page survey, where we're sort of providing massive paragraphs. I think ideally it would help to streamline things and make the language just as accessible as possible. But that's just a thought.
I'd agree with that. We don't want to introduce new barriers to participation at all. There's enough of those out there as is.
So on question too, Matt? I know Crystal had flagged maybe just reframing that. To what extent do you support the goal, just to simplify the language a little bit? Would that be an easy enough edit to make?
Yeah, that's pretty simple.
Okay.
So on the topic of education, though, I guess are questions 3 and 4, I mean, I guess those are about gauging the understanding of our audience, basically, I assume, or? Okay.
Both understanding, but also opinion. So, yeah, for example, if people consider natural gas to be clean energy, that's giving us a lot of insight into some education we need to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But saying like very clear might lead a little bit of both. Like that might.
Okay. That's what I thought. Now, I did just want to, question 5. I wondered if it, do we have that? If we should add the option of reducing energy costs for Athens-Clarke County residents as one of the options to that? Or something to that effect? Because I feel like this is a question that actually is kind of educating people. That's what I mean by, because this is telling people what's possible. So just by virtue of doing it, and you could even be a little more explicit about that in the question, I think, but that all of these things are possible, that by implementing this plan and through this plan, we could actually achieve these things. And that is education. But I don't think any of them really ask the question. I think reducing energy costs for residents, property owners, whatever, might be one option we should add.
Does that get framed out with a kind of it just occurs to me hearing what you're saying, Amy, is there any value in saying, would you be willing to spend money with the result being saving on energy cost?
Well, I feel like this question is kind of, I mean, in a way, I guess what I see this question is doing is that you have all these things that we can do, and we could probably put we can prioritize them in different ways potentially. I mean, so I think by asking very important to not at all, it allows us to say, wow, the number one thing that people thought was most important was this, and that might help us understand what we need to do first. So that's kind of how I see this question. I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, my biggest question for you, Amy, around that, about putting that as a reduced cost, is trying to just how we want to clarify what insight we're wanting to get from stakeholders and from the survey takers with this. Because I can read that, I can just reduce energy costs, I can read as an equity point that we might be trying to see if there's support for. But I could also read it as a cost effectiveness value statement, or somebody who just wants the cheapest approach to achieving the goal.
True.
Or a consumer advocate.
Maybe it's not a valid. I mean, you're right. Who doesn't want to reduce energy costs? I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, I guess.
Well, I don't even mean it that. Like, I like adding that and getting, that noted there. I just want to figure out a little bit more, like, what's the angle
right
that we put on it, so that we get the feedback. Because the preferences for the other ones are like, do you want us to prioritize kind of economic development, or like the second one is like pretty clearly trying to focus on that equity point or public health point. And so I like the reduce cost piece, but I just want to know how do we put a finer point on it?
Well, maybe, I mean, the second option is kind of getting at that, I guess. I mean, ensure all Athens-Clarke County residents receive the benefits of clean and renewable energy. I mean, in a way, I think the subtext to that is, let's remember, maybe it's that what we're trying to get at is, do people think that it's important to prioritize people who struggle with energy burden, versus just, reducing costs for everybody across the board, versus do we want to prioritize policies that help those who need it the most first? I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, certainly knowing what people find the most, what their priority is really good. Whether, because if the whole thing is I want to save money, and that's what everybody, we have 90% say I want to save money. Well, that frames out kind of some of what our approach would be, is we're going to focus on people wanting to save money. So I think there is value.
And we're probably going to get answers that are going to be 70% plus support for all of these. Like the part where it gets interesting is which ones are heavily biased towards very important, and which ones are a little more evenly split between somewhat and very. Like that's really the compelling thing for us to see. Like, okay, like everybody's going to like more jobs and better public health, but where do they want the emphasis?
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to tease out.
Which in priority order would you think is once you start getting people to prioritize what they think is most important to least important, or I don't want to say least important, but maybe most important to them and less important to them kind of approach, I think you're right. You will get some really rich data from that.
The other one that I'll just flag from one of the surveys we just finished analyzing was Cleveland, Ohio. And this question actually enabled us to see where some of that ideological bias was in the survey respondents, because we had a very heavy emphasis on the first round that came back on protect the environment that was far beyond what you would have expected to see in the general public. And so that we went back and said, we got to open up a second round. We have to go back, make sure we're targeting the right communities with the survey. So there's kind of secondary things that you can get from from this that might be helpful as well around that bias question.
On that same question, is there a way to express the thought behind the last option, ensure communities that face past environmental harms receive benefits first, without being specific about environmental harms? I mean, we're talking about, clean renewable energy is economics. I don't know, like, if environmental harm specifically gets at what you're trying to do there, or if actually we're trying to ask something a little bit different.
I'd say that one's more of an environmental justice question as it's currently framed up. Like, it's saying, is that the priority that you want to put forward, which makes it a little different than a general equity question, which would be more like the second one, or more like maybe the emphasis of the reduced costs question too. That's not to say that's where you want to, where this group feels like we need to put that question, but that's the intent there, is to see what kind of support do you have for that kind of EJ mentality.
Right. All right, Erin, how about we go to the next slide? I think we tapped largely into the questions and potential bias, but I don't know if we've had a chance to touch on this question of if there's a section that should be removed or added.
So I have two other, I'm not sure I'm not sure how they fit in here exactly, but I had a comment before we get done on question 9, which is the one about what should your electric utility do? And this was another one of those things where I felt like it's an opportunity without adding much, but to educate people, because so I look at this, I'm like, yeah, my electric utility should do all of these things, but I have no idea. I think it would just be interesting to provide a little information about, I don't know how to do it, but like whether it's in Georgia, like how many utilities do each of these things? What percentage of them do? Can they do them? Are they required to do any of these things? How many in the United, what percentage of utility providers in Georgia do these things? What percentage in the United States? I think that it's an opportunity to create some advocates. You know, that if I don't have a clue, like I said, I'm going to say yes, absolutely. I want my company to do all of these things, but I still don't know how possible it is if it's pie in the sky. So I just think this question is a great opportunity to educate people and create some advocates for clean and renewable energy. So.
I totally agree with that. And I think part of the reason to ask this is that not all of them do offer all of these. And so there's a lot of feedback oftentimes from these kinds of surveys where the utilities don't know these kinds of details about their customers and what their customers want them to be providing. And so there's a lot of actually like it's a great opportunity for the community to bring something to the table other than just kind of demands to the utility to just, you know, sometimes I get the impression the utilities think you're just complaining in these conversations. And with this kind of stuff, you can come back to be like, there's a question in here, are you aware like of your utilities clean energy programs? And you'll get a response that at least the ones we've run in the South, it's normally the case that more than half of the population has no clue, right, that their utility is doing anything. And the utilities are like, we're spending millions of dollars on these marketing budgets, trying to get people to know about our programs, and they still don't know about what we're offering. Like, how is that the case? So I think some of that's like really useful. For our purposes, it can also be really useful to know which ones the community wants to see as a part of that. I think the easy solution, well, I'm going to say easy because I don't have to do it. So Megan and Mike, you all tell me if this is not that easy, but you could have links, especially in the digital one, that directed to the ACC website that's got all that information, that has the 100% plan information on it. They could also have links to the 4 different utilities and the program offerings that they have. And then that takes you right to that. So you can answer the question like, yeah, I want pay as you save and I want a better solar program. And what's being offered? And you click that and you find out like, well, we have some Energy Star rebates. You know, you're like, okay, but that's what it is.
Well, and to Matt's program, we have heard some of that from the utility itself, that they really don't have necessarily a full grasp on all of the things that their customers want. The PSC rate structure question is going to come up again January 2022. We're only, what, 8 months away from that whole process. And this is a great opportunity for us to gather data on what Athens wants and what they would like the utilities to be providing for us as customers.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned pay as you save, in that question where you ask about that, I think I'm relatively familiar with pay as you save, but isn't it typically structured where the savings that you get from the upgrades, like your bill essentially is structured not to go up? Is that true typically?
Yeah, they're structured. They won't approve things through a pay-as-you-save or through, you know, more generically, an on-bill financing program that's worth having, that are going to increase your energy bill. So you may not see. They won't do it in a way that they project will increase your energy bill. You may be in a spot where it does come down.
Okay. I wonder if
it be cash flow positive from the beginning.
And I wonder if there's any way to massage that question a little bit to indicate that that's the structure of that program, because again, you know, if half of all respondents don't know what their utilities offer, my guess is they have no idea how pay-as-you-save is structured, and I don't think that, you know, in what follows there really lays out you know, how that's intended to work, that your bill doesn't go up but you get these upgrades, you know. So I don't know if there's a way to massage that to kind of put that information in there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thing that occurs to me though, you have to apply, and that's a limited access program. I don't know, because it's a pilot in Atlanta and it's a pilot in Athens, and they have allocations. So that's the other part of that, is it's not a widespread, anybody can apply. It's a pretty limited program.
But if 100% of the people say yes, they want it, maybe it will be a widespread program.
That is a great observation. You're exactly right. Yeah, yeah. And it would encourage, back to my statement earlier, we're trying to gather data, right?
Mm-hmm. I only had one other, that question 12. So the question 11 has a list of things of when deciding how you get to 100% clean and renewable, how important are each of these things? And then 12, for your home electricity consumption, would you consider moving to 100% clean and renewable energy? Yes, no. And I mean, I feel like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I feel like there might be some people will be like, well, yeah, but I can't afford it. You know, I mean, I feel like we could get more information out of that question, not by having, no, I can't afford it. No, I'm not interested in it. I don't know how. No, I don't know how. Or yes, I would, but I don't, I don't know. I just think a few more options to that would give us more information about people.
I totally agree with that, and I think we should leverage the digital technologies that we have here to make an open-ended response to the end of that if you said no, why, and then just have them tell us.
Okay.
Would be a fantastic way to get more information about why that wasn't appealing to whomever for whatever reason.
Okay.
One thing I'd love to hear, Caleb, John, Tawana, Tom, y'all have been very quiet. So not to put you on the spot, but I just did. Crystal, you were very quiet too. Anything what are y'all thinking?
This is John. I was actually just typing into the chat box. I'm sorry. It's just been a great conversation listening to the different sides and input. I was actually typing in that I need to run. But no, I mean, everything sounds great. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the revisions.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. I mean, like you said, it's an interesting conversation going about this. I could see a lot of the different aspects of that, kind of, yeah, when somebody would say something, yeah, I agree with that. Oh, yeah, but I forgot about that. And then, so I mean, again, I think I would mimic what he just said. Be interested to see what the final form of this. It's, doing survey questions, although I just composed one and sent one out, some of my students just recently, but that's kind of not my thing. That aspect of it. I personally, I like the idea of having at least a somewhat of a component of an educational aspect of this, but I think the primary purpose of this is really just to get information in. At least that's how I perceive it.
Thank you. Tawana, Caleb, y'all got anything you want to add in there? Crystal?
Yeah, sure. My main concern that I was kind of thinking about when y'all sent out the feedback questions was just kind of looking, kind of what Crystal was saying about the accessibility of some of the questions, particularly the policy related questions, just kind of thinking about, okay, will the everyday Athens individual who might be taking this actually know anything about these policy options? Will they really be able to kind of answer those questions? So yeah, that was kind of my main idea and concern, and Crystal kind of talked about it earlier. So
Tawana, we're going to put you on the spot. She may be on a phone call too. I might have put her too far on the spot. Okay, let me turn it back over to you, Megan.
Great. So this is all really great feedback. We're going to take it and go ahead and incorporate it into a revised draft that we'll be sending your way to just let us know if you think we accurately captured what we discussed today. Then let's go ahead to the next slide, Erin. So I'll go ahead and just start concluding. We've got a few minutes left. So from today, we reviewed the CAB engagement opportunities as well as the stakeholder charrettes and the look ahead moving forward, as well as reviewing the community survey. So next month, we are planning to go ahead and have feedback on the mailer and radio PSA. So a reminder on that is we sent this around last fall. We'll resurface it for y'all. When we sent it around, there were a few options to pick from, more or less which one do you like best. If you feel like you already reviewed and already gave us your feedback, or in the A or B option, there's no need to respond. But if you do review and you notice in reviewing it that there are some times have changed a bit and that anything new needs to be reflected within there, do let us know. And then we'll also be starting to push out, once we get this approved version of the survey ready, we'll start pushing it out publicly, and we'd love to partner with you guys in getting it out to your networks and any guidance on how we can best get that out. We'll also be working with y'all to circulate the PSA materials, and then we'll be presenting out an overview of the conversations that we'll have had by that point with the utilities as well as our other one-on-ones with business leaders. So that's going to be coming your way for next month. Then next slide.
Does the radio PSA, I can't remember, so will it, if it's kind of coinciding with the community survey and the public charrettes, does it talk about, you know, be sure this is how you can be involved? And the other thing I was wondering, have we thought about, you know, having somebody go on a few, I mean, somebody could do an interview with Alexia Ridley. She, you know, does, and basically she basically then airs those as PSAs. There's WXAG radio, which I think, you know, particularly is listened to by, you know, the African American community. And there's lots of talk shows on that. And I feel like somebody could go on there to spread the word. I think just getting somebody onto different, you know, radio stations that reach different demographics in this community might be one of the easiest ways to get the word out. So I don't know if there's been any thought to that, but that's something I'd like to put on a suggestion.
We have done some thinking about it back in the, you know, this is back in the fall, early fall when we were looking at this. Now we're kind of reviving it just for that purpose. I would ask this. I'm of course willing to go on the air, but it doesn't have to be just me, or it doesn't have to be only me. If there is someone who, in the cab, you guys want to get involved. If you want to go on the air, if you will help promote it, either, you know, by yourself for that, you know, or with me, or you know, let's just let me know. I think that would be a more powerful message, that it's not just some government officials getting on the radio to tell you hey, the government's here to help. I really think that if there are other people in the cab, or even in the community that you know of, who would like to participate in this, I think that can be extremely beneficial. So I would love to have a kind of a speakers bureau type thing, if I'm willing to go talk, you know, if it works out with my schedule. So yes, Amy, yes. I love it.
Megan, will it be possible to get either the notes from the one-on-one business utility provider information before the meeting, so that we can kind of look it over before you present it?
Sure, we can make that available to you.
We can at least let you know what we have. I think we have some businesses, and there's still some one-on-ones that are going to kind of go into March at this rate, at this point. for example, I've been trying to reach out to the school district to get their input. And I just got a note back after spending 3 weeks trying to contact one of their key people that I found out he had COVID and was in the hospital for 5 weeks. He just got out of the hospital. It's going to be a little while. So that one, we have to take a little bit different route to get to it. So, and some of our businesses are into March as well. But yes, I certainly, I guess what I'm saying is it might not be all of the information, but we'll get you what we have.
Yeah, and if it just comes in like a few days, a week before the next meeting, with what you have at that point, that'd be great.
We're going to try to post it, and if we can, Megan and Bailey and Aaron, if we can let people, once we post it in there, maybe we send out a notice saying, "Hey, we just updated this to the CAB," and especially these things that are really of interest, which are the feedback.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Then
Maggie will help me do that, right, Maggie?
I'm going to see if that was a yes from Maggie.
Yes, I'm assuming it is. So last thing on our list before we say thank you is remember to contact us. Amy, you've got, I know you and I are going back and forth on a date and time. Anybody else wants that for your organization? And let me also say, if you want to invite other people in, this is your listening session. So whoever you think is the most important people to be there, we want to respond to that well. So please let me know. And thank you guys.
Thanks. See you guys next time.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, all.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Has left the meeting.
Megan O'Neill.
Has left the meeting. Has left the meeting.
It's just us because I can't find my mouse. 3 screens. There is a disadvantage.
Mine was just like a delay of it was closing, and so I was like, okay, great.
Yeah, everybody else has got everything jumps.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Matt, you feeling good? Maybe he's not there. It's a ghost of Matt of past.
Yeah, he probably jumped out already.
All righty. Thank you, Aaron.
I'll see
Take
you
care.
later.
Bye.